We continue our look at Gustave Caillebotte with a beautiful little painting from 1882, The Yellow Rose in a Vase. And as it says here, this was actually purchased by Edgar Degas. Degas would be another one of the wealthy members of the Impressionist group, and again, he also bought a lot of the work in addition to Caillebotte. And from what I hear, there was even kind of a competition between the two in terms of buying stuff. But this is an interesting still life to look at, because we'll notice that the roses are on their way out. They've already started to peel and petal, and we have lots of loose petals on the tabletop itself. And it is a very peculiar life with Gustave Caillebotte, because as I mentioned earlier, he dies very young. He dies when he's 45 years old, but he has this real kind of premonition very early on in his life that he is going to die young. His brother Rene dies, who's a younger brother, dies very young as well. So he actually gets his will and gets everything together very early in his life when he's in his 20s. And this is actually very good, because one of the things he does as we get towards the end of the lecture, we'll see this, is he actually takes his massive collection of Impressionist work, over 60 paintings, and he donates them to the government of France in hopes that they will be seen in a public exhibition. And again, this is the first big push, if you will, of the Impressionists kind of being shown beyond their own showings of the Impressionist exhibition, but actually having an exhibition completely open. So as we kind of get to the end of his time here, as I mentioned, he stopped showing, as it says, he stopped showing his work at the age of 34, and he actually moves. He first buys this estate at Gennevilliers, and eventually he will move out there altogether and just kind of live in this wonderful country setting. But again, we have kind of the view, the yellow fields of Gennevilliers, and again, perspective lines, three big ones in front of us, kind of creating these patterns that shift us off. And on top of that, we have that impressionistic brushstroke creating the flowers themselves. And again, if we think about the other artists that we have working in and around him, it is he continues to be influenced by these people. Again, the Pontoon at Argenté, this is where we have Monet living, and painting, I believe, during this time period as well. So a lot of this is actually in close connection with him. We also have Auguste Renoir, essentially like floating between the two households, in addition to his own household, as I believe his parents lived in this region as well. So you kind of have this group of artists kind of living all together. As it said, he quit showing publicly when he was 34 years old, and a lot of this extent, this later part of his life, he's not even really painting in a tremendous amount. He's still painting as kind of enjoyment, but he's pursuing a lot of other activities as well. Beautiful view of the plain of Gennevilliers from the hills of Argenté, looking down at the river Seine in this boat, and seeing these wonderful farm fields off in the distance, and again playing around with those lines and having us go one direction forward, but then when we hit that, we kind of shift off in a different direction, almost creating this curvature, which you might have actually been able to see from the fields. But again, as I mentioned, a lot of this later part of his life is really just spent in leisure. Again, he was an avid sailor, so a lot of this time was spent doing that kind of activities as well, really just kind of enjoying his life. I imagine being this upper class member who is just enjoying his life and not really having to worry about too many things. But at the same time, I always look at this last period of his work and kind of see this undertone of sorrow or sadness. We have this gentleman walking in a blue blouse, if you will, up this hill, and this is another version where we're seeing either the back or the side of the individual within the painting of Gustave Caillebotte. But again, we can see this man walking forward, but we don't know where he's walking to. And honestly, it doesn't really seem like, just from the painting, that he's in a tremendous hurry to get there. It seems like with his hands behind his back, he's slowly strolling down the lane of life, if you will. And again, I really do view a lot of these as almost being self-portraits like the one we're viewing here. This is obviously a direct self-portrait, and this is kind of what we see him looking like in 1889. And the thing about self-portraits is you can always, they're a view directly into the psychology of the artist if they're done correctly. And we look at this and we see a person who's aged. Again, we see gray hair and patches, and we see, again, this kind of look of heaviness about him, as if the weight of the world might be on him, even though we know he did have a very, very leisurely life. But as we continue, again, I wonder if he had this sense or this premonition that always kind of weighed on him of his early death. And again, maybe this was simply a self-fulfilling prophecy for him. We look at the gardens of Gennevilliers that he's painting from, and we see images like this very late in his life in 1894. And again, very similar to some of the paintings we've seen by Monet in the later part of his life. I'm thinking of the poplar paintings in particular. But again, when we look at this, we notice that the trees are barren. They're not full of life, and they might have these little sprouts coming out, but these are bare trees that we're seeing. And again, when we look at this, we do kind of get this wonderful complexity that we didn't necessarily see at the beginning of his work. Again, we've lost that use of perspective that we can so easily see in so many of his other works, but we see a lot of the impressionistic style kind of creeping in, especially when we look at the flowers and that type of thing. As I mentioned, essentially, he does pass on very early in his life, and he bequeaths this gigantic collection of Impressionist art. You can read the numbers for yourself to the French government, and there's this entire back and forth that occurs posthumously, where they don't want to show all of the paintings, and eventually Renoir, who was a good friend of Gustave, kind of steps in and mediates, and for his time, I believe he gets a painting out of it. But eventually in 1896, as it says, 38 paintings were displayed. And this is, we have the Renoir as just one example of the paintings in his collection. But again, when we look at this, this is a major body of work that we think of as the Impressionists.